Zambian elections, then the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa's COMESA's Election Observer Mission has released its preliminary statement on the Zambian election. It says that the voting process was conducted in a generally peaceful and transparent environment. The mission has urged that in the event of any disputes in the electoral process, the parties should pursue legally established avenues to resolve them. Meanwhile, Zambia's opposition leader, Kambidima Wotela, has taken an early lead in the country's presidential election over incumbent Edgar Lungu. This according to the first results from the Electoral Commission earlier today. Large queues formed outside polling stations on Thursday for the closely contested general and presidential elections. Lungu is seeking a second term in office, but faces a strong challenge from Wotela. The winning candidate must acquire more than 50% of votes to avoid a second round runoff. All right, well, for more on the Zambian elections, we're now joined by Dr. Kambidima Wotela from the Wits School of Governance. Dr. Wotela, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so very much for being with us here on SABC News this afternoon.
Good afternoon, and how are you?
I'm very well, sir. We're hearing that, of course, opposition leader Wotela has taken on an early lead in the presidential vote. What can you tell us at this moment in terms of those latest developments?
Yes, currently, I think just about 10 minutes ago, the Electoral Commission of Zambia has announced 31 out of 156, just short of 20%. Of the total constituencies that are actually required to announce the ultimate winner. And Mr. Akainde is in the 400s now, whilst the incumbent, Mr. Lungu, is just slightly above 200,000. So we can say it's actually a two-horse kind of race. And it always obviously helps to actually have a context. So we have the incumbent having taken over from the late Michael Sata's term, promoted and turned a blind eye to cadre activities, including lawlessness, access to monies, more likely government money, through unfair business practices. And against the constitution, he opted to go for the third term, which obviously had to be ruled by the Constitutional Court that, yes, he can be, which meant that they discounted the term that he had finished for the late Mr. Sata, which technically means that we put the former president, Mr. Banda, as not having served as a president, if that actually can be allowed. Then when we move to Mr. Wotela, a top businessman, most of his actually investments in agriculture and processing agricultural products. It's allegedly he jump-started his business having benefited from Zambia's privatization during the MMD regime. This is his sixth attempt, having lost to Mr. Banda more than once, to Mr. Banda, the late Mr. Sata, and Mr. Lungu. Obviously, the elephant in the room here is that Mr. Wotela, as well as his party, are accused of being a tribal party. So this is one of the things that everyone will be looking out for his first cabinet and probably all his cabinets throughout his tenure. Otherwise, from the official results, from the social media results, it seems that he is likely to probably be announced the winner. But again, we have to be careful here and wait for the official results.
You know, it's interesting you talk about Wotela's party being seen as a tribal party. We do hear that, you know, in Zambia, people tend to vote, you know, along some sort of tribal lines. Perhaps you can explain that to our viewers. What exactly is the situation in Zambia in terms of how people actually vote, and what are those tribal lines that people vote with?
Yeah, I mean, giving you a background, you know that the borders that we have were not drawn up by us. I mean, it's a very debatable issue whether or not we had them or we'd never had them before the colonialists came. And fortunately for Zambia, and I say fortunately, it's a very sort of diverse country with almost 6 major tribes, but the maximum is actually we can divide Zambia in almost 72 tribes. with a very rich history, with actually some societies originating from South Africa, some coming from Tanzania, some coming from the DRC. Now, human beings, like any other animal, are animals of a feather. They flock together. Yeah. And that is why, if you notice that our first president, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, one of his major missions was to actually unite the pact. This is not a new issue. It was there even at independence, and that is why the motto at that time was actually "One Zambia, One Nation." It was all in an effort to try and actually unite. Now, 50 years, more than 50 years later on, I think there's been a lot of intermarriages. We've seen public management actually in areas where they're not coming from. So there's been such an integration, and talking about tribalism is actually something that is quite archaic. However, I should also be able to mention that I think maybe because we shy away from talking about it, because there's always unity in diversity, only if you accept that you're that different. So as much as Kaunda's strategy was probably the best, but suppressing the problem might actually sort of promote it.
Yeah, you know, I slightly digressed on the issue of tribalism, but it's obviously a very important issue when we do talk about voting in Zambia. I want to continue talking about the election results, really, as they sort of come in at this time from the Electoral Commission of Zambia. They had been some concerns that the incumbent might not, in fact, and it's actually quite obvious that he wouldn't be happy indeed to lose, and might then do things that are not very, what's the word I'm looking for, not particularly legal in terms of trying to sway, you know, the elections in a different direction. You know, there have been concerns throughout during the time of the elections, and I'm surprised that it's being said that the elections were relatively fair and peaceful, when we had been hearing that there were some internet restrictions that were in force. You know, we were hearing that the army had in fact then at some stage been deployed by the incumbent, and so, you know, all these issues sort of come into one when it comes to what the reaction will then be by the incumbent should he lose then, you know, those elections. I mean, what can you tell us then when we put all of that information together as to, you know, what it could be should the elections not go the way of the incumbent?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been a president before, and I always laugh. What is that is so admirable to try and stick on? And of course, we've got a few examples in Africa of people who've actually been presidents for a long time. But it would be very unfortunate for Mr. Lungu for two reasons. Number one, there's always been an example before him. Dr. Kaunda, yes, he stayed long, but he gave power when he lost. The same actually happened with Mr. Banda. He handed over power. For Mr. Lungu, the problem actually is going to be that it comes from a situation where the electorate are not as satisfied with the PF party. So yes, the PF has delivered, and I'm saying delivered, most of the policies initiated by the MMD in terms of infrastructure projects. However, most of those have been actually inflated, probably as a way to fund the party, or probably to fund the individuals in the party. And second, the poor economic performance is one. We should also mention the debt that was actually incurred during the PF regime. So even the last minute attempt to try and just sort of salvage the interest rate never really worked out. But more importantly was been the behavior, the bullied political behavior and undisciplined senior notable members in the party, some of whom were actually advisors to the president. So we have a situation where we have an electorate that is not dissatisfied. So in all honesty, even if he actually attempted to hang on, it is going to be really a bumpy ride for him. Then I should also add that I think on record, I may be wrong, I'll probably ask my seniors, my school, but we've got a very disciplined army and very professional. And I say that because it was also participated in most international as well as continental tasks, where we've actually sort of fared very well. So I'll be surprised if they actually did allow that, and so on and so forth. The shutting off of the internet, it's become such a trend. I mean, we saw this in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, it so happened. But finally, people, to any problem, they find a way out. And social media is still alive and vibing because they're using VPN. Unsecure as it may be in terms of the privacy of the people that are using it, but they're now able to communicate. And that is where the added problem also is, because you can shut down or even actually have communication that is within your reach. But now you actually have social media, which is not within your reach. So it would be quite a very unfortunate situation if he actually did attempt to do that.
And I mean, just as we wrap up our conversation, just, perhaps interestingly, what we've spoken about how Zambians tend to vote, but, I'd like to know the general sort of attitude, I suppose, towards elections that Zambians sort of have. And I think, particularly in a time when we're dealing with a pandemic. I mean, I'm sure you know that here in South Africa, there's currently, a debate whether or not to postpone the elections, whether to have them next year in February or to have them as, the date that had been indicated. And, it seems as though, Zambia was able to do so regardless. And in fact, some voting stations being quite full and, having to stay open longer than it was planned and so forth. So it does seem as though, Zambians are particular about exercising their right to vote. So maybe let's talk to this attitude then towards elections in general.
There was an attempt, I think, months earlier on at the peak of the coronavirus in Zambia. And as you may know, the first and second wave never really sort of affected the country as it did in South Africa. The third wave, I think, has been brought to sort of under control. But regardless of that, they were actually caused to try and postpone the elections on the basis of that. But it seemed that they could not budge, or rather the public just didn't want to buy that. And probably because they were in a hurry to see change. You would see that everyone was actually just looking for change. And unfortunately, it's that change where we're not actually voting in. It could be that we're just voting out. And that is really problematic, because all you're trying to say is that you're tired and you don't really want this. And hence the reason why, regardless of all odds, they actually went ahead and actually had to have these elections. And my worry, actually, having looked at the high turnout, because currently with the 20% votes counted, it's standing at over 72%. And in Africa, that is actually quite high. But we did not see a lot of COVID guidelines, especially in terms of distancing, actually being observed. So one just wishes that we not see sort of a surge in numbers of COVID after this. But reacting to your question is that I don't think they would have had much success in an attempt to actually postpone the elections, just like it's also being resisted in South Africa.
Yeah, Dr. Wotela, very informative indeed. Thank you so very much for engaging us on the issue of elections in Zambia. No doubt we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on what's happening there. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, and have a lovely afternoon.
Same to you, sir. That is Dr. Kambidima Wotela from the Wits School of Governance, talking to us about elections in Zambia. And of course, it looks as though the incumbent might indeed lose the elections, but we'll be giving you that breakdown and more information throughout as we get more information on those elections from the Electoral Commission of Zambia.